Okay, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for the Lancet webinar, Born This Way, Why Healthcare BI is Fundamentally Different. My name is Laura Madsen, and I am the Healthcare Practice Leader. First things first, we're going to have some slides to look at, and it's the best medium from a webinar perspective, but it is a little bit of torture, and I'll do my best to make it as interesting as possible as we go through this content here today. But yes, I am well versed in the art of torture, and no PowerPoint. So today we're going to cover a couple of things, and the first thing we're really going to talk about in some depth is what makes healthcare business intelligence, or healthcare BI, so different from business intelligence in other industries such as retail, manufacturing, and finance. A lot of those differences drive the adaptation and adoption of business intelligence in healthcare. So we'll talk about those pressures associated with it, and sort of pose the question, is it too late for healthcare from a BI perspective? Then we're going to talk about the 10 things you can start doing to get started with business intelligence in a healthcare setting. And this is actually first in a series, and we're going to talk about the couple of next webinars in this series about healthcare business intelligence. So what we need to understand from a BI perspective is that differences really matter. And one of the ways that we know we're very different in healthcare is regulatory pressures. In retail, there are some regulatory pressures. SOX and some other finance reporting is probably the closest you get from a regulatory perspective. Manufacturing, there are really none unless you, as a manufacturing organization, have adopted ISO 9010, I think, or 9020 is what they're up to, and Statistical Process Control, or SPC, which is actually the origin of the black belt kind of concept. So not a lot of really big regulatory pressures from that perspective. These are nice things to have, good and important things to report, need to understand them. But unless you contract from a manufacturing organization with the government, there's not a lot of regulatory pressures to report data. Finance, there are certainly several. If you're a finance organization, and if you're a finance organization now versus probably 4 years ago, way more. The FCC and not FCC, I'm sorry, SEC is probably the most dominant one there for finance, but there certainly are nowhere near 1,200 annually, which is really where a lot of hospitals, large hospitals, are at. Is you're getting close to 1,200 reports that they have to annually submit to different regulatory groups, and that's excessive. If you're responsible for reporting in a hospital organization, that's probably your entire full-time job, is not worrying about the next best thing, but worrying about getting those regulatory reports out the door and making sure that they reflect what you're doing as an organization. So from a hospital perspective, there's no real summary of all the regulatory pressures that are happening, but there is one for health insurance. So if you're a payer, if you're a payer, this is what your regulatory map sort of looks like. These are all the groups that are interested in you submitting reports to them as a result of you being a health insurance payer. And so that's pretty consistent across the board. Some states vary, but when you're talking about being a provider or a hospital, there's no map. There's no regulatory visual because every state is very different for their pay for performance and Medicare and Medicaid requirements. So the moral of the story is that you're under a lot of pressure in healthcare to report a lot of different content. And it's really getting worse. It's ramping up with the HITECH Act of 2009 and meaningful use, ACOs, which are very metrics driven. This clamp that's on this head here is tightening, and it's tightening quickly. So when we talk about healthcare BI, one of the biggest challenges is trying to get everybody together. And we've all probably said or heard at one point or another, it's like herding cats. And it's very true. And so maybe cat herders are talking about being a BI project manager or software project manager. But what we know for sure is that we, as BI project managers or BI practitioners in healthcare, are certainly wishing we were cat herders. But you have all of these regulatory pressures pushing down on you, 1,200 reports a year, and all these different state regulations and the federal regulations that are coming in. And what you're really trying to do is just get everybody on the same page from an information perspective. And that's really an enormous task. Because of all the regulatory requirements, when you start talking things like corporate lexicon or data governance, you have to remember that each of these entities define things differently. So CMS defines patient and member one way, maybe your state defines it as a different way, and then you have your health information exchange, maybe trying to define it in a way that is pleasing to both. But if you really look at the definitions for those, if you try to align with the CMS or your HIE or some of these other entities, you may find out that it really doesn't align with how you see the rest of your business. So your hands are really tied from a corporate lexicon perspective right away, and that's probably one of the biggest challenges that healthcare has that other industries don't, is the baseline, the foundation of any good BI program is this data governance concept and having consistent definitions. And this, having those regulatory pressures really have really big ramifications for the rest of your reporting and analytics. So the question is, we're behind the 8 ball. Can we catch up? And there's no question that for all of these reasons, the regulatory pressures, the standard definitions, the lack of standard definitions, different procedural codes, the move to ICD-10, all of these reasons and all of these distractions means that we really are behind the 8 ball when you look at a traditional BI maturity model. So we haven't, in a healthcare setting, really fully adopted business intelligence and data warehousing and all that it can provide to us. But the HITECH Act of 2009, with the meaningful use reporting requirements and ACOs, are really pushing a national conversation about what it means to use data in a healthcare organization in a meaningful way. So yes, we are playing catch up, but I don't think we have a choice. There's really very few things that can manage this as well as BI. So how do we get out? How do we get out of this mess? Can we catch up enough to address all the needs in a timely manner? Can Batman and Robin rescue their friend in time? Well, I think the good news is that it is possible to get out of the data quagmire that we find ourselves in healthcare, and that really is through business intelligence and data warehouse best practices. It's not easy, and there's a lot of work to be done, but the rewards will be significant. The standard method for creating the single source of truth in data warehouse best practices really does bias the consistency for usage that's needed and allows for performance and scalability. So we're going to start with thinking about the 10 things that you can do to get started as a healthcare organization today. First of all, the pillars of healthcare BI teams. We've really Lancet has 5 disciplines of business intelligence. We've created that framework for our entire BI practice, and we've adapted it for healthcare BI. And I believe that if you address these 10 things in your attempt to tackle BI, you'll increase your likelihood of success. So the first thing we really need to do is create a team. You can't do this alone. So you really need business expertise, clinical expertise, and technical expertise. Even if one person had all of that, you would need 20 of those people. Okay? Remember that good teams are made up of Ts. You have a group of people that have a broad range of diverse skills. That's the horizontal part of the T. And then you have people that are very skilled in one thing and have a lot of depth in one thing, such as ETL, data analysts, that kind of thing. And that's the vertical part of your T. In healthcare versus other industries, you really don't have just business and IT. You have technical folks, you'll have your business folks, and then you'll have your clinical folks. And even within your business folks, that could vary a little bit in that you'd have traditional business departments, your administration, and obviously finance. So there's a little bit more of a subtlety there as well. So the next thing we think about as you've built out your team is the next big hurdle you have to figure out is the data. And the volumes of data that we're dealing with in 2011 are increasingly significant. And we really need to question ourselves when we're thinking about bringing data in to our data warehousing environment. Certainly disk space is cheap, especially compared to a couple of years ago. But you still have to ask yourself if you really need that data in a warehouse environment because it requires management and maintenance. There are new ways of managing external and extraneous data without creating additional work for your IT staff. Analytic sandboxes are a great way to bring in data that's relevant for analysis in the short term but does not require a sophisticated ETL process to move or maintain over time. So as you're thinking about bringing in data into your environment, just know that just because you can doesn't mean you should. And data needs change. You have to find a way to deliver it without making major process changes. And ETL requires a lot of work, right? So think about that as you're bringing your data into your environment and know and understand that you have to have all the data there, but you don't always have to manage all of that data in a really specific environment. You can use things like analytic sandboxes for your analyst team to buy you some time. So we've talked about the team, we've talked about ETL a little bit, and by the way, the subsequent series we're doing, there is another series, another webinar we'll be talking about specifically for ETL for healthcare. So the next thing we really have to think about as we're delivering content to our end users is providing value. And if your focus should always be on providing value, if you aren't doing that, then pack up and go home. Everything that you do, from creating ETL scripts to visualizing data, should have an end goal of empowering your users to make better business decisions. That's where the real return on investment resides. So keep your eye on the value ball, and everything else will fall into place. You can get an ROI if you enable your business users to make better decisions. Your ROI will never be in creating data tables or managing data. Your ROI only exists when your business users are enabled to use this data to make better business decisions, improve operational efficiencies, and that kind of a thing. So that's why your eye always has to be on that value ball. So the next thing we talk about is a plan for your plan, if you will, and getting your organization from strategy to execution. And when you're thinking about creating a BI program, you sit down, you think about it for a while, you create the strategy and a vision for what it's going to deliver and all of those important things. And oftentimes what ends up missing is this sort of high-level strategy, but you don't really think it through, and then you just kind of dive in and you buy some tools, and then you wonder why in 6 months it sort of falters. And Gartner indicated in November of 2008 in a research note that many failures of BI programs were attributable to the lack of a strategic vision for business intelligence. So I think it's very important that you create a very specific roadmap to get you from strategy to execution. A plan really is important to understand the context of your decisions. If you have a plan in place and a strategic vision for what you're attempting to achieve in a period of 6, 12, and 18 months, then when you're making decisions that seem not that important in the small perspective, but could end up having implications in your decisions 12 months from now, at least you have some guidelines in which to make that decision. If you don't have that vision, that long-term 12 to 18-month perspective, making decisions now might have really broad stream implications down the road. So you want to at least have some framework for making those decisions. So creating a roadmap for your program with accompanying detail for the 12 months worth of at least 12 months worth of projects. Make sure you leave room for changes to your organization and their goals, because organizations are dynamic and changes happen. But always have a method of planning in place. to get you from point A to point B. You think about it very much like a road trip. And you wouldn't go on a road trip without having some type of plan, at least know that you're going to Florida. You don't plan to go to Florida by not planning to go to Florida and end up in New York. It's expensive. I think one of the challenges of business intelligence teams overall is that we're all sort of recovering techies, recovering IT folks. And some of us are more flexible than others. And in order for a business intelligence team to be really good at what they do, they have to reflect the business, and they have to stay very dynamic and agile from that business's perspective. If you're not delivering content quickly enough to the business, your project probably won't work very well. So remember that organizations, particularly healthcare organizations, are very dynamic. The days where we could take 8 to 10 months to complete projects are gone. Agile methods for data warehousing and BI projects are gaining popularity because they drive tangible business value to users in shorter increments, reducing costly rework cycles. And it's not just a trend, and it doesn't mean a diminished quality product. Agile methods are here to stay, so it's best if you take some time and learn them. The really wonderful book written by Ralph Hughes called Agile Data Warehousing, I highly recommend it. And he gives you some very pragmatic tips of how to use agile methods that adapt to business intelligence and data warehousing. I think data warehousing is very different from your typical technology IT project in that data is very fluid, and it shows you the symptoms of broken processes in your organization. And if you don't have a method of addressing that in short increments in a very agile method, you'll likely sort of lose the forest for the trees because you'll get so mired down in the data coming at you and you're not sure what to do with it. So if you can take small chunks of work and be really quick about working through those, these agile methods are really well adapted to data warehousing projects. So just remember to stay flexible. So we talked a little bit about ETL in our first slide where we talked about what data to bring in. The impact of ETL here, we think about it, garbage in, garbage out, right? And ETL is one of those areas where you could very, very much have a garbage in, garbage out scenario. Healthcare data will always require a fair amount of transformation to be usable by the end users. So spend your time on business requirements and test often. These are agile methods. However you cut it, ETL processes are not the glamorous part of BI, assuming that there is a glamorous part of BI. But the truth is that for most BI and data warehousing projects, success resides in this extract, transform, and load process. And the vast majority of your effort will be here. So if you think about any given BI or data warehousing project, I would attribute somewhere between 60 to 80% of that effort is actually in the ETL. Applying those business rules to the data so it makes that data more usable. One of the best things you can do is hire a really good ETL architect, and don't skimp on the time it takes to do this work well. Remember, you only should be bringing in the data that you need so you have the time to do it right the first time. ETL is incredibly important to the long-term success of your program, so we will address that in a completely separate individual webinar, ETL for Healthcare BI. Nothing really is more important than the foundation that you build your data warehousing and business intelligence program off of. Just like a house, if you're building this foundation, if your foundation isn't built in a really solid way, following best practices, your data warehouse can crumble, your BI program can crumble, and in this analogy, your home can crumble. So data modeling is one of the most important things that you can spend time on early in your process. I'm a really big fan of spending the time, and that likely means spending some money, to create a flexible model that will grow with the organization. But data modeling is no different than any other project, and it's easy to get stuck in analysis paralysis. So remember again that we're always focusing on business value. Keep your eye on that value ball. You don't have to deliver everything immediately, and your business will thank you if you take time to deliver smaller projects more frequently without the rework. So one of the most important things you can do, from my perspective, is start with a really good, solid data model foundation. Remember to bring in only the data that you need using good ETL processes. Sometimes it means you have to spend a little bit of money by bringing in a consultant for your data modeling if you don't have data modelers on staff. And that's okay. We'll talk a lot about data modeling in another separate webinar, again, data modeling for healthcare BI. So BI programs will not be BI programs without data governance. And if you're serious about your data being a corporate asset, then you had better plan on managing it as one. Data is incredibly fluid, dynamic, and often, almost by definition, flawed. So in order to have a BI program that provides reliable data to your end users, you must have a method of governing the data. I really like the idea of setting up governance structures that align with how your organization is managed today. You don't have to create new groups or entities when you can just borrow from something that's already there. Ensure that everyone knows your role and decision rights, but at the end of the day, you have to make really tough decisions to keep the project going. So know that you still have that executive branch, if you will, that really is responsible, the buck stops here group or person that says we're going to define it this way. And I can tell you that nothing gets people more worked up than trying to define something that is so commonly used like patient or member. Be open to those conversations, get as much input as you can, but also keep in mind that every definition of patient or member is not really the definition of a patient or a member, and you can call those things different things. Just like on the payer side, a member and a subscriber are two different things. Sometimes those definitions overlap, but they are fundamentally two different things, and they're managed different ways. So the best thing you can do is take existing functions within your organization and adapt them to the new data governance group. And remember that you will have to make tough decisions, so you have to find a buck stops here person. This is I'm going to get on my soapbox a little bit, so please pardon me. I'm pretty passionate about this. User really is not a four-letter word. And sometimes I will read on blogs and in Twitter feeds that users are dumb or stupid or geez, could they just stop and think for a minute? And you know, I really think as BI professionals, as IT professionals that are delivering BI capabilities to our business users, we have to keep in mind that this is not their job. Our job is to deliver it so they can consume it. It is not their job to figure out convoluted, confusing applications. It's not their job to figure out why one definition varies from the other definition. That's not their job. So you have to keep in mind that business users are overworked, frustrated, and flustered, and they need these information in order to make decisions and that is their job. You also have to keep in mind that user adoption in a very well adopted program drives the ROI for your BI program. So without these folks, without this really good supportive user base, you probably won't have a well-funded program, but with them, you're pretty well locked in. So keep in mind, they're not stupid, and their job isn't to figure out the data. Their job is to take that information and make key business decisions with context. So you have to create the content that is most relevant to them in a way that makes them want to consume it. In other words, create dashboards that are very visually appealing and easy to understand. Allow for mobile BI, and so they don't have to be locked down to a laptop when they're on the road. And create that analytics sandbox we were talking about earlier, where they have a space where they can go out and just look at the data. And this is for your analysts, not your average user. So your analyst can go out there and look at the data and not have to wait for 2 or 3 weeks while we figure out good ETL scripts to get the data over. If you have happy and engaged end users, you will have a well-funded BI program. And if they're driving good business decisions, that is where your ROI comes from. So as much as we want to curse them, and I've certainly been in that position, users are your lifeblood, and they're not a four-letter word. So finally, if you get all these things in place, and if you create your BI team and you bring in only the data that you need, create an analytics sandbox, and create a good, strong foundation with a good, flexible data model and some repeatable ETL scripts, and you remain really flexible in your structures and agile in your delivery to your business users, and you deliver things that, in a way that business users can consume them in a visually impactful manner. The next thing that you really have to think about is how you operate your BI program, because if you've created all these structures and all of these dashboards and all this content, there's still things that will need to be maintained over time. So with all these moving parts, it does require a level of management. BI programs don't manage themselves. So with the governance and the ETL, data models, reports, dashboards, the programs can be really quite complex. So have a plan in place to manage each aspect of your BI program, including operational things. For example, how long will it take for you to respond to a new request? What if the server goes down? The management of a BI program also is responsible for that roadmap we talked about, the 12 to 18 month roadmap, the return on investment, and your ROI and your budget. Users drive your return on investment. If you have a user out there doing something really incredible with the data, creating a lot of operational efficiencies, that's where your return on investment is. So if you're in touch with your users and have those folks sort of adopting and supporting your program, you'll know about those ROI, and that's when you can start doing those analysis and reporting back to your executive board. And that's when your budget will be really helpful. So make sure you have some good service level agreements in place if servers go down when requests come in, and create a communication plan to make sure that everybody knows the processes associated with your BI program. How do they submit a new request? How do they learn when the data's are ready? Or how do they learn when a server goes down and what's the next step? If you do all of those things and communicate really broadly out to your organization, that will also improve the overall adoption of your program. And that's our webinar for today. Thank you so much for listening for a few minutes about the why healthcare BI is so different, and 10 things that you can do to get started in healthcare business intelligence. Here's my contact information. You can reach me anytime at my email. Here's my phone number. I do Twitter, mainly work stuff. We also have a blog here at Lancet, and you can stop by there and see what I add in every once in a while. You can read my articles on the BI Network. I'm the co-host of the Healthcare Channel. And in October of this year, we're going to have a Healthcare BI Summit, a one-day educational event dedicated to helping healthcare BI practitioners in healthcare learn new things about how to execute successfully in a healthcare environment. So I'm Laura Madsen, Healthcare Practice Leader at Lancet, and thank you for your time.